On About Books, we delve into the latest news about the publishing industry with interesting insider interviews with publishing industry experts. We'll also give you updates on current nonfiction authors and books, the latest book reviews, and we'll talk about the current nonfiction books featured on C-SPAN's Book TV.
Well, welcome to About Books, Book TV's program and podcast about the business of publishing. In a few minutes, Publishers Weekly editorial director Jim Milliot will join us to discuss the upcoming publication of the House January 6th committee report. But first, here's some of the latest stories from the publishing world. In her new book about Donald Trump, Confidence Man, New York Times political reporter Maggie Haberman includes materials from 3 sit-down interviews with the former president. One exchange in particular has gotten a lot of attention in the wake of the FBI's August raid on the former president's Mar-a-Lago home. Haberman writes that Trump, quote, demurred when I asked if he had taken any documents of note upon departing the White House. Quote, nothing of great urgency. No, he said. She also writes that the former president was, quote, sometimes stunned at his own backers' fervor, telling aides, quote, they're effing crazy. That book will be released on October the 4th. And longtime NPR Supreme Court reporter Nina Totenberg published a book about her friendship with the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Politico headlined their review of that book, quote, Nina Totenberg had a beautiful friendship with RBG. Her book about it is an embarrassment. The memoir, Politico said, quote, shows everything that's wonderful about friendship and awful about insider culture. The reviewer, Michael Schaefer, writes that in Dinners with Ruth, Ms. Totenberg failed because when you're a powerful reporter covering things that shape the life of the country, the matter of how you do your job is a lot more important than one lovely friendship or some quasi-academic debate about a journalist's true duties. And finally, in publishing news, former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman of Virginia, who went to work for the January 6th committee, wrote a book with a behind-the-scenes look about his tenure on the committee. It's called The Breach. It came, according to news reports, as a surprise to members of that committee. And now more on the January 6th committee, its forthcoming report, and how the publishing industry is handling that report's release. We're joined by Jim Milliot, editorial director of Publishers Weekly. Jim Milliot, as of this conversation, we don't know when the House January 6th committee is going to be releasing that final report. But if you go to Amazon today, there's already half a dozen versions of that report available for pre-order. So what does that tell you about the publishing industry's expectations for Americans' appetite for wanting to buy the book form of this report?
Well, I think it obviously states that they think there's going to be a lot of interest. Obviously, the discussions have covered a lot of ground. There's a lot to digest, and I think having a print version handy let people take some time with all the material and try to get a better sense of what's happening.
So what are the rules here when it comes to publishing a congressional report?
Well, basically there are no rules. Obviously it's a public domain document, so virtually anybody can publish it. And in the internet age, I'm sure there'll be various versions around in some sort of digital format. But the publishers, they have a long history of doing these type of things. Some of your older viewers might remember the Starr Report, which came out during the end of the Clinton administration. And that was an interesting episode in that it was when the internet was really, making great grounds and disseminating information, and there was some dispute about whether, they could get this material for free on the internet. Why would they want it in a book? But 3 publishers went ahead and did publish a book about the Starr Report, and they sold fairly well. So from then on out, depending on the material, publishers. They keep an eye on this, and they do think it's worthwhile to publish.
Downloading documents becoming so much easier now than then, why do publishers continue to think that the public will buy a book form rather than just downloading the PDF of this January 6th report when it comes out?
because it's easier to read in a book than download it a PDF. But well, there's some very recent history about why it might be worthwhile. The Mueller report is, the most recent one of these type of documents that have been put into books. And the one that the Washington Post and Scribner's did, division of Simon and Schuster, sold over 300,000 copies. And then we had Skyhorse did one that had uh, forward by Alan Dershowitz, I'm sorry, that sold over 120,000. And then there's a small independent publisher house up here in Brooklyn, Melville House. They did a paperback version, so that was cheaper, and they sold about 40,000 copies. So you add it all up, two of those, the Sky Horse and the Scribner Washington Post one, they were bestsellers. And they did put some context to it. Like in the intro, kind of set up what the whole Mueller report was about and that sort of thing. So, there is a history of doing this and a history of success, actually.
So is the intro the way of distinguishing your report when it comes to these congressional reports that anybody can make into a book form? Is the idea here to have a well-known intro, and that's going to get more?
Right. Well, as I think the ones that are in the works for the January 6th Commission, one is coming from Random House, and Adam Schiff is doing, I believe, the forward or an epilogue, one or the other. And his name is definitely attached to it. And then one that's coming from Macmillan, Jamie Raskin and the New Yorker are adding stuff. I'm not sure. It's not clear exactly what the New Yorker's role is going to be. I believe they're going to have some commentary on it. So, it's a way to try to separate yourself a little bit from the other competing materials that are out there. And I do think, having somebody you trust, I think everybody now knows who Adam Schiff is, gives a little bit of cachet.
What about targeting your intro towards a specific audience? You mentioned Skyhorse in one of the previous congressional reports. With the Skyhorse publication, the version that's on sale on Amazon right now that you can pre-order, a forward by former Trump speechwriter Darren Beattie.
Right. Well, they know who their audiences are. So yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess you could call it signaling, if you will, who you're getting in collaboration with. So it's and that'll help gin up some publicity. It also puts, to some degree, it puts the face on the book, if you will. So I'm not sure if Schiff or Raskin will do any interviews for this, but they might. And every book needs a spokesperson for it. Sometimes it's the publisher. Almost always it's the author. So it'll be interesting in this case. Who does the talk shows? Who comes on your show? To decide. To talk about why they decided to get into this.
When it comes to the HarperCollins edition, a forward there by MSNBC legal correspondent Ari Melber. When it comes to the costs of printing these books, is that where the publishing houses are paying the money to have a big name forward written if they don't have to pay for the congressional report itself?
Yeah, well, that's a help. And it's interesting that you bring up the paper situation because, again, many of your watchers and viewers are probably aware that, last year there was a lot of problems with the book publishing supply chain. There's a paper shortage still going on now. It's not as severe as it used to be. So I think there was a little bit of concern about whether there'd be enough production capability and enough paper around to get these sort of instant books done. But obviously that they found a way, and their determination to go ahead and do this, I think, speaks volumes for the kind of interest they think there's going to be there. I mean, look at what I think the ratings that CNN and everybody else who's showing the hearings, if they were doing very well. So, I think the publishers are starting to piggyback on that interest.
What has Publishers Weekly been able to find out about the print runs of the various publishing houses for the January 6th report, whenever it does drop?
Well, unfortunately, they haven't told us yet, but we'll be keeping an eye on it, and I think you'll see it selling comparable to the Mueller report. I mean, I think that's probably almost a low bar. I mean, that 300,000 that the Post, well, Scribner one did. I mean, that's really an impressive number. It depends, sometimes you do have, as you pointed out, a lot of competing titles out there. I don't know if one will hit 300,000, but if you do the quick math, they got close to 500,000 copies sold before, and I'm not much in the predicting game, but I would think that 500,000 copies sold is probably a reasonable target.
You mentioned the Starr report, the Mueller report. What makes a hit versus a flop when it comes to these congressional reports being put into book form?
Well, that's a good question, and I think it goes to the whole nature of trying to predict what books are going to work and what aren't. Not to divert too much away from this, but we just had the Penguin Random House trial, and a lot of publishers, went on the stand to talk about how hard it is to predict what's going to work and what's not going to work. And these type of things, though, I do think, there is some sense of right versus wrong, or I want to find what's on my side. I want to I want to understand the argument a little bit better, and I don't know if it's going to be a thick document, I'm sure, but like most books, how much is actually going to get read? Is this going to get read cover to cover? I don't think that'll be the case in too many instances. But people want to have it and refer to it. I mean, this is going to be an ongoing process, right? Because I think and you could correct me if I'm wrong here, John, this is sort of like the preliminary report, because I know there's a couple other publishers that are standing by wanting to publish like the final version. So, this is maybe just, sort of volume one. Maybe there'll be a volume 2 or a volume 3.
Well, there's also versions at this point of the individual hearings. At this point, as you and I are talking, there's been 8 hearings so far, and you can buy the book form of each one of those hearings. Also, if you go to Amazon, you can find those as well.
Right. So, it is easy now, especially with Amazon, to do a digital version, and it's not hard to self-publish either. I mean, it goes to that whole self-publishing environment that sprung up, over the last 10, 12 years or so. So it's really easy to do this. In terms of what the quality of some of these may be, I'm not sure about that. Obviously, if you're coming from an established publisher like the ones we've talked about, you know what you're going to get. If, depending on what else you want to, how much you want to get involved, buy a cheap version. I'm sure it'll be fine, but it's buyer beware, perhaps.
You mentioned quality. I wonder, I don't know how many of these reports you've read over the years, but I wonder your thoughts on the writing itself when these reports come out. If they're written in a different narrative style by the committees, knowing that these things are likely to be bestsellers, are likely to be hits, as it were. Does it change the way that these reports have been written, or has that changed over the years?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, they really, again, the people they assign to do an epilogue or forward or something like that, that's what sort of sets the tone. And it definitely depends from publisher to publisher on how much they want to tinker with the actual text itself. I think for the most part, they try to stick as best they can to the actual document and the actual wording that was used in the hearing.
And I wonder, when it comes to the final report, though, if you think the committee staff themselves or whoever writes this report before it gets released to the public, if you think that knowing that these things are likely to be hits, that they change the way that they write these reports to try to make them more thrilling or more interesting or more readable?
I'm not sure about that, but you could be right. I mean, I'm sure it's the back of their head that this is an historic document. So even if it's something just for the record or something that will be available to the public, you do want to come off looking like you're making a well thought out argument. So yeah, I would think that's definitely something that you have to have top of mind about this is sort of a legacy type of thing.
Thinking back over the years to these various reports, and in modern times, we can go as far back as the Senate Watergate report. You've mentioned the Mueller report, the Starr report, the 9/11 report. Is there a report that you can remember that had expectations of being a bestseller that was kind of a flop?
Not really. I think the Starr report was probably the one that didn't do as well as some people thought. I mean, there is this, tension between too much information and not quite enough information. I think by the time the Starr report came out, people were kind of tired of it. And it was just sort of the same old story, right? I mean, I think people knew the fundamentals very clearly. Here in January 6th, I mean, there's so many different roads to go down and so many things to explore. I mean, there's a lot of meat to get into. Other than let's face it, the Starr Report. I mean, was a romance thriller in some ways, and I think people kind of knew how it ended.
And then when it comes to distinguishing these reports, we've talked a bit about how many there are out there. It's a question for these reports, but I guess for the publishing industry in general, having a good cover art when it comes to these reports. If you look at the New York Times version, their cover art has shattered glass and broken doors inside the Capitol. There's a hint of a United States flag through the shattered glass. I wonder your thoughts on trying to get the catchy cover art on these reports.
Well, it's something that publishers do. That's their specialty. So, and as we alluded to before, they know who their audience is. I have to think most of the people buying this are going to be on the left-hand side of the political equation. So, you're trying to draw attention to the main arguments that'll be in the book, and something like what you just described. I think will fit right into what the readers are looking for. And it'll be interesting to see, how the Skyhorse one does in terms of will it attract people who, were defending former President Trump. Will they look for arguments there that you could maybe poke holes in?
Remind folks about Skyhorse and their stable of authors, folks who don't know what Skyhorse is.
Well, Skyhorse started off as sort of a general publisher, but in the last several years, they've published some authors who a lot of the mainstream publishers won't. They published the Woody Allen book when Hachette dropped it for various reasons. So they've taken up the mantle. They published Robert Kennedy book on the pandemic. So they've taken up some books that again other mainstream publishers haven't published, and they're doing it because they think it's important, to have the freedom to publish, and they want to publish as many different types of views as possible. I you know I can't say that a lot of people in publishing agree with their stance, but some do. I mean, as a defender of free expression.
And I guess in our last minute or two here, explain what Publishers Weekly will be looking for here in the wake of the January 6th report being published. What's sort of your job as you track this?
Well, we're gonna track, as you alluded to before, how they're doing. That's sort of what we're gonna. We won't be reviewing them. We'll be, tracking how the sales rates going and who sort of the winners and losers are. It'll be interesting. I hope my prediction of 500,000 comes true. And the industry, I mean, it could use a little jolt. So I'm not sure this is it. Publishing's had a couple of good years. This year's been a little slower than the previous 2 years. Um, will this thing bring people into the bookstores? You never know what will. I mean, that's what makes publishing publishing. You're never really sure what a bestseller is going to be till it hits the list.
And bookstores probably not unhappy that this dropping as the holiday season is about to begin.
Right, I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure how great a holiday present it is, but if you have an uncle out there who's interested in politics, could be the perfect book.
Jim Milliot is the editorial director of Publishers Weekly. Always appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Pleasure to be here.
And you're watching and listening to the About Books program and podcast. Each Tuesday, dozens of new books are published. Here's a recent sampling. In their latest book in their best-selling Killing series, Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard focus on the deaths of a trio of American icons, Elvis Presley, John Lennon, and Muhammad Ali. The book is Killing the Legends, The Lethal Danger of Celebrity. And in The Future Is Now, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation host and science correspondent Bob McDonald explores how current energy technologies and the lessons of the global pandemic can be used to solve the climate crisis. And Fox News contributor Joe Concha offers his assessment of President Biden's time in the White House in his book, Come On, Man, The Truth About Joe Biden's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Presidency. And each week, national publications publish their reviews of newly released books. Here's two from the Wall Street Journal. Almanac of American Politics founder Michael Barone takes a look at the book Democracy's Data by Colgate University history professor Dan Book. Quote, the book promises to reveal the hidden stories in the U.S. Census and how to read them, and delivers some interesting tales, Barone writes. But his text, he says, is alas sprinkled with academic argot. We read about misgendering, non-binary, and transgender people, and about Latinx, a term rejected, he writes, by almost all those it is intended to label. Also from the Wall Street Journal, Barton Swain reviewed Smart Brevity, the new book from Jim Vandehei, Mike Allen, and Roy Schwartz, co-founders of the news site Axios. The book, subtitled The Power of Saying More with Less, is written in Axios' journalistic style with one or two sentence leads and paragraphs labeled Why It Matters and the Big Picture. In his review, Swain writes, quote, maybe the Axios style is the future of written communication. If so, please kill me. The authors, he says, show they can write lean and punchy copy, but their own copy, he says, isn't exactly top drawer quality. You'll see these books and the authors featured in the near future on Book TV. And coming up later on Book TV, it's our weekly Afterwards program. This week, we'll feature former Trump administration Trade Policy Office Director Peter Navarro. His book is titled Taking Back Trump's America, and he's interviewed by Washington Examiner senior political correspondent David Drucker. Here's a preview.
So this is the second book of what's going to be eventually a trilogy on the Trump administration. And this focuses primarily on this phenomenon under Reagan where personnel is policy, where who you put in the White House can either be good or bad depending on whether they're in sync with the president. So that's part of the focus of this. And of course, prospectively, at the title, Taking Back Trump's America, obviously is also oriented towards the future.
A reminder that Afterwards airs every Sunday at 10 p.m. on Book TV. And finally, each month on our in-depth program, Book TV brings on an author for a deep dive into his or her body of work. This month, we interviewed TV host and Abrams Media founder Dan Abrams. He talked about the state of the U.S. legal system and America's legal history. His books include Lincoln's Last Trial and Alabama v. King. That interview is available right now on our website at booktv.org. Well, thanks for joining us for About Books, a program and a podcast produced by C-SPAN's Book TV. Book TV will continue to bring you author interviews and publishing news, and you can get this and all of our podcasts on our C-SPAN Now app, and you can always watch online at booktv.org.